Hey everybody, it's Anita Anello with the Ripple Effect, and this is episode 8 of the Messy Middle, the podcast that I had started. That's really Messy Middle is all about one mom's journey to be able to build a profitable business. So, excuse me. And this episode, what we're going to talk about is as women of faith who have a God-sized idea of a dream inside of us, and we want to be able to launch a business based on an idea, but we've been in the corporate space for the bulk of our career. Like, what are the specific challenges that come up? So I'm doing a series on the challenges of those of us that have come from a corporate space and have had usually a certain level of success and a confidence in that area, and now we want to move over to be able to cultivate this God-sized idea that we have inside of us. So I'm going to actually go through some notes today that's a little bit different than for me, that I have printed up because I really want to take some time to dive in deeper on this topic. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So as women of faith, we have this unique perspective and set of values that actually are like core to our values. And inside of that, they also actually guide us in this entrepreneurial journey that we're on, this endeavor that we're on. And those of us also that are women of faith, and let's just be clear, like I'm going to talk about God through this podcast, but you can use whatever language that you want and frame this however you want. I just believe that each and every woman that's out there that has an idea for a business that's really bigger than herself can really benefit from this material. So, and this content today specifically. So, whatever language that you work, this is just language that works for me. You can go ahead and use language that works for you. So, let's break this down a little bit as I get into it. So I believe that with God's guidance, we can actually overcome the obstacles and achieve that success that we have, that desire that's deep inside of us. And with that, what I want to see is I want to be able to continue to cultivate. And I've been on this journey for the last several years to be able to create a movement and a environment where we as women who have had this corporate success, we attend a church regularly, we have healthy marriages, we want to intentionally raise our kids. And in that, sometimes don't we know that we need a community of people that can come around us, that can really be our champions and our cheerleaders. And so those are kind of some of the foundational things that I want to set the stage before we begin here. So I think there's really a couple of things that we want to pay attention to when you have this God-sized idea and this God-sized dream inside of us. And really for those of us that have come from that corporate space, it can really be kind of scary because maybe, as I talked about in the episode yesterday, maybe you're used to having a team around you. Maybe you're used to having a boss that tells you what to do and what your goals are going to be and how they drive the success of the company that you work for. But now maybe you're something stirring inside of you that is causing you to say, like, what if I want to do more than that? What if I've reached a certain level of success? Like, this is part of my story is I worked for a global software company, an ERP software, one of the biggest software manufacturers in the world. And I had reached those levels of success. I had climbed that corporate ladder. I had felt like I was super successful on paper with, the things like the money, the title, the accolades, the awards, the notoriety and all that kind of stuff. But I actually wasn't super. There were areas in my life and after climbing that ladder, I remember not being really super satisfied and really walking around going, God, is this it? I feel like I've done all these things and I've reached these heights, but I got to that level and I was really actually super dissatisfied. I was really lonely. I was really unhappy. I was going after things in my life at that season, at that time, that I thought were going to be the things that would actually bring me satisfaction and joy and love and peace inside of me. And I really actually had none of that. And so I went on a journey. I went on a journey that I don't know that I would necessarily recommend anybody else go on, but this was my journey. And that in that journey, one of the things that I did is I ended up retiring at age 43 and coming home and homeschooling my kids for a really long and fruitful and precious season. We've done that. We just actually finished our 14th year of homeschooling, and we're not done yet. And then several years ago, I felt this stirring. I felt like this calling inside of me that God started giving me this vision and these pictures of the next season to be able to walk into. And that's really the season that I've been in right now, is being able to be a successful business entrepreneur and homeschooling mom and wife and mother and all these different titles that I own and I love, but in a way that gave me time and money freedom. And so let's talk through some of the things that I walked through and some of the things that I think will help you as you're going on this journey of figuring out some of these steps. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is really trusting in God's plan and direction in this new business venture. And that can be a really hard thing. So it can be a hard thing for a couple of reasons. Number one, starting a new business, especially on your own after being in the corporate space, it can be overwhelming. It can be daunting, especially if it's actually based on this God-sized idea and this dream that you have inside you. And I believe that we all have this specialized knowledge, especially when we've been working and been successful in the corporate space. But if I take that and reapply it in a different way over here, sometimes it could be really daunting and overwhelming. In today's online space, we know that there's never been an easier time for us as women, for us as believers, for us that want to launch an online business. There's never been an easier time to be able to do that. But there's also so much noise in the marketplace about what to do and how to do it and all that kind of stuff. So when we're trusting in this vision that God's given us, I think there's certain steps that we can take. I'm not saying you have to take. I'm just sharing with you what my journey has been. I believe that there are steps that we can take when I learn to trust in the plan that God has for me. So a couple of things that I've done that have been really helpful and essential in really navigating through these uncertainties, the feelings of overwhelm, and the unexpected challenges that come with launching a business. Number one is for me that when I have this picture, this vision that God gives me, that's one of the ways that God speaks to me, is he kind of gives me this vision and paints it out. Usually what happens for me is I don't have any idea what those next steps are at the time. And also usually what happens to me is I want the big picture, but I don't normally get that. I usually get it step by step by step. So when I'm in this phase of I have this idea bubbling up inside of me and I'm saying, okay, God, what do I want to do? What's the direction that you want me to take to be able to take that next step? I do a couple of things. Number one is I read the word. And I pray about it a lot. I look for confirmation for what this next step might be. Number two is I start leaning in and talking to friends that I know that I can trust with this might be kind of scary idea of a business that I want to start, a business this vision that I feel like God's given me. So it's not just about, for me, it's not been about the making the money of the 6 or 7 figure or 8 figure business. It's been about, Lord, how do I serve this community of ladies like you ladies that are listening to the podcast today? How do I serve them well in being able to grow this business? And so I do a couple of things. I read the word and I pray to look for more discernment and wisdom, because that's super important to me to be able to get those next steps. And then I go ahead and connect with ladies that I know, like, and trust. They might be ladies that I know personally, one-on-one, sit over a coffee or a meal or that kind of stuff, and really just kind of dive in. They might be ladies from my community, from my church. They might be ladies that I know in the online space. They might, and it's not just, for me, it's not usually just limited to women. It's always men and women that I know, like, and trust, that can pour wisdom into that. They can give me good ideas. They can confirm that they see these gifts inside of me that can help me to kind of take that next step. Some of the other things that I do in trusting God's plan and this direction when starting something new is I try things out. And I know for a lot of us, we want to be super successful, and we want to be especially if we've been successful in another area of our life, in our marriage, or raising our kids, or in our career, or in Maybe it might be your body or your mindset or whatever that looks like, or in serving or whatever. If you've reached a certain level of success, sometimes I think that as we go on in life, we actually can switch gears and go over here and try something new. And we might think, oh my gosh, like it should be totally successful. Like I'm God's daughter. Of course, there should be nothing that gets in the way of my success. And we start declaring all these things. And while that's all good and well intentioned, I think sometimes, at least for me in my journey, what I found, like I almost made it not okay to fail any longer. And that was just a huge mistake that I made, is that I realized that in order to take the next step, part of the learning process, part of the growth process, part of trusting God in that is actually I needed to be really okay with trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing lots of different times until I hit the groove of the confidence of seeing the steps come together. But that was a hard thing for me, is in the trusting in God's plan. And as a Christian woman, what I was hearing around me is, like, just declare God's word over you, and that's good. But I think sometimes we can misinterpret that and say that somehow there's never going to be any trials, there's never going to be any failures, we're never going to fall flat on our face, and we're never going to show up on a podcast and make a mistake. Like that, I just don't think, at least in my experience, like that's just not how life actually works. Like if I think about the way that I've raised kids, if it was teaching my kids how to walk, teaching my kids how to speak, teaching my kids in homeschooling, it was never that I expected for them to be like perfect the first time around. That would be silly for me as their mom to expect perfection and success the first time around. No, instead, like there was a radical amount of grace and a radical amount of patience and a radical amount of, oh, you fell down, let's try again. And sometimes, I don't know why, sometimes, at least what I've observed is, as an adult who's reached a certain level of success inside of a church community, I don't know, sometimes maybe I think we don't give ourselves the freedom to be able to try and fail and then try again. Because the thing is, it's not the failure that's the problem. It's actually getting up and trying again. That's the solution. So that might be like a writer downable. It's not the failure that's the problem. It's how I interpret that failure. And then I get up and I actually just try again. So I might try something in the business and it doesn't work, but I get up and try again. And I try that over and over and over and over until I actually reach the level of success that I'm looking for. By the way, there's never a point in my journey that I felt like, okay, I arrived and I'm not going to ever have to learn or do or try again. So that's just a side note. We'll add another podcast on that topic. Okay, so that's number one, is trusting in God's plan. Number two is identifying and validating this God-sized idea that aligns with our values and our faith. And I think as women of faith, wherever you are on your faith journey, I believe that it's super important to like identify those values, validate those values up against this idea, this big idea for this business. I call it a God-sized idea for a business because I believe it's going to be bigger than me and just bringing money into my household or buying me a new car. Like those things are great. And those things are amazing. Like they're fine as part of the business plan, but they can't be the end all be all. Because don't we know that if we have a God-sized idea, and it lines up with my values and my faith, it's going to have to be bigger than me. Because what happens when I just get the car that I wanted? Like, I have a goal of getting a new car. Okay, that's great. But when I get the car, if that's the only thing my goals and my values are based on, and my faith is based on, is God, just give me a new car, then when I reach that destination, that tiny destination might feel like a big goal, but then when I get it, it's going to turn into a small goal once I get it. But if it's only going after the thing, then once I get the thing, then I'll be dissatisfied again. And that's what actually I described earlier in this podcast, as I experienced that a lot in my career. So I think as women of faith, it's important to have like these business ideas that line up with our values and our faith. And one of the ways that we do that is, I'm kind of thinking of two different ways. One way that I've done that is I've identified by writing out. So the process of writing and journaling has been super powerful in my life because it takes the ideas that are in my head, all the ideas my brain goes all the time, a lot of times, and it takes those ideas and puts them down on black and white. And then I can, as I journal those out and I look at those, then I can kind of evaluate and I can process and I can think about, like, is this really fit for me? Does it line up with my values and my faith? And as I journal those things, that is actually part of the thinking process that we all need to do. One of the things my coach says on a regular basis is, Anita, you need to write those ideas out, those values out, those pictures of the vision, so that you can really validate it and finish the thought, the process of thinking. See, part of thinking happens in our brain, but the other part of thinking happens when we write it out. And then the third part is when we speak it out. And as we hear that in our ears in a different way, then all of a sudden we start to validate, like, oh, does this line up with my value? So if I have a core value, I'll just use some practical examples. If I have a core value of being a good steward of all that God's given me, I know what that's going to look like for me because I've spent time writing that out, defining that. I've spent time articulating that with my words and hearing it back in my brain as a different way, so that I can see, like, when I know, like, when God's giving me my kids to be able to steward, I know for me that looked like homeschooling. It looked like giving them a solid foundation in their identity in Christ, so they know who they are and whose they are, and they don't let the world define those things for them. I know that meant, in order to be a good steward, I wanted to teach them how to be great learners on their own, away from me just hand feeding them, spoon feeding them information. I wanted them to be able to go after information that was valuable in their lives. So those are all parts of being a good steward. And as you can see, that lines up with my values and my faith. So God shows me regularly in the Word that, it's the wise that are diligent. It's the wise that work hard and provide for their families for multiple generations. It's those of us that are wise that see how these are tying in other areas of my values and my faith to be able to actually work its way out in practical, tactical operation of actual actions. And that's super important to me, that I don't just have a faith that sits around in my head. I want it to work itself out in a tangible way by doing something with my belief system that I have. The other thing that we can do is we can participate in really introspectively praying about this, connecting with other people that have a similar belief to you and also a dissimilar belief to you. I believe that it's important to, when we stretch and we grow, that we don't just get like isolated in our tiny little bubble, and then always having like the yes people around us going, oh yes, Anita, I agree with exactly what you say. Oh yes, Anita, I agree. Oh yes, everybody else is wrong and we're totally right. Like, I've just come to believe in my walk and my own personal journey of just life, is that I'm going to stay really small in my life if I only surround myself, which, by the way, that's our natural inclination, is to only surround ourselves. And I think as Christians, sometimes we make this mistake. We only surround ourselves with people that agree with us. But instead, if I have the courage to actually break out of that and take my values and my faith into the marketplace and say, like, well, what else does somebody else think? How does that strengthen me and encourage me and actually stretch my thinking? Because don't I know, like, my God's big enough to be able to handle a different viewpoint than what I have. So I just have learned to be kind of confident and okay in knowing that I can have my belief system and somebody else can have an opposite belief system, and we can actually coexist in amazing ways and honor each other and be kind to one another and support each other, even if we think differently. Because I also know that I might not also always be 100% right. Evidence has taught me that sometimes I'm not always right, even though that might be hard for me to digest sometimes. So that's another sideline where we won't dive in there. So when we're identifying and validating this God-sized idea that aligns with our faith and our values, I think it's super important to have a business that lines up with those areas in our life that are super important to us. Just one last example, like it wouldn't make sense for me to start a business that supported, I don't know, something like the porn industry. Like I'm not, no judgment on it or whatever. It just wouldn't make sense for me to support a business that was like based on that industry and diminish the value of women and men and all that kind of stuff. Like that just wouldn't work out for me personally, because it wouldn't line up with my values that I have in for a healthy marriage, just to one husband and not multiple partners. It wouldn't line up with my values that I have towards being able to raise healthy children that know their proper identity, but also know their proper gender and not there's just a lot there for that example that it wouldn't really make sense for me to be able to start a business that doesn't line up with my values or my faith. Again, not judging it, it's just not the right fit for me. So when you are taking your corporate experience and moving it over into a business experience, just be aware of what your values are by writing them down, what your faith really is, and perhaps by writing it down or talking it out, and then find a business that lines up with those things for you. Because that's where you're going to thrive. If there's a disconnect in your integrity, if there's a disconnect in your values, if there's a disconnect in your faith, you're going to have a hard time launching a successful business and getting it profitable, because inside your mind, whether you can acknowledge it or not, your brain and your will always be like protecting you. There'll be a whole bunch of little versions of like self-sabotage going on underneath. Your identity will be kind of like at war with itself all the time. There'll always be this friction in the business if you don't have these things that are lining up for yourself. So again, like, me, if you've watched any of my content on social media or listen to the podcast for any length of time, like I like to get down to the practical and tactical. So write things out, talk about them, pray about them, then go ahead and do them. So the third thing that I want to talk about just in this episode in particular, as we're talking about this idea of this God-sized dream, and specifically when we're successful corporate women of faith and we are shifting gears over to be able to build a business. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and sometimes we miss this, potentially maybe even more in the Christian space than those in the secular space, is that we need to develop a business plan that reflects the faith-based vision and the goals. So one of the things that I've noticed sometimes that we can make a mistake is we can say like, oh God, like I'm just blessed, I'm amazing, like God loves me. And while those things are true, we still need plans, people. We still need plans, business plans, goals, habits that actually take us from point A to B, from point A to Z, whatever that looks like, all the steps in your business. So please don't make the mistake of thinking that we don't need to have a plan around our business just because God's in it. So that's usually always, most of the time, I feel like every time, like kind of a recipe for disaster. And it's another form of self-sabotage, because what we're doing is we're kind of like, we don't have the direction. We'll have a tendency to have a message that tries to reach everybody and then doesn't actually attract anybody. And in doing that, what we want to do in our right fit messaging is I want to always attract the like-minded people that work for me. And I want to repel everybody else because I'm not the right fit for them. Like my voice doesn't work for their life. My methodology, my plans, my tools that I use, they don't work. They're not going to work for somebody who is offended by what I have to say. And that's totally fine. Okay. And right. So I want to be able to develop a plan of who I'm going to speak to, what marketplace I'm going to reach, how I'm going to do that. What does my social media content look like? What's my plan for delivering content on a regular basis? Like How am I going to attract people in? How am I going to walk them through the funnel? How am I going to walk them through the sales cycle? How am I going to serve them once they're my clients? Like, we need all these pieces in our business. It's not just enough that I say, hey, I was like a rock star. I still am. I still have clients in this space. I'm a rock star in the project management, specifically for escalation projects when they're on the verge of like a corporate divorce or a lawsuit. They have a 6 or 7 or 8 figure implementation that is off track, and they need somebody that has deep knowledge in the software that they're implementing and their business processes, but they have an issue with their reseller, their channel partner. They just can't get along. There's friction there. They need somebody who knows how to navigate the relationships with the project with that high level of intensity of the pain points that come with having a project that big. And it's like this enterprise level of super rock star status of escalation projects. That's my sweet spot. That's one of my sweet spots. And so taking that sweet spot and being able to reapply it into a business, like, don't we know I have to have a plan to be able to do that? I have to have a plan to take my corporate knowledge and turn it into a consulting business. I have to have a plan to take my corporate knowledge and turn it into a coaching business. I have to have a business plan that reflects that. And so the business plan, really, if you think of it this way, ladies, it's your roadmap to achieving your goals, just like you've seen in the corporate space where the biggest software companies that are out there, they all have a plan, and they have a plan for everybody to follow. They have a plan, they have a vision, they have the KPIs that go along with that, they have the steps to success. That, don't we know, like, as we're shifting gears and being able to do that in our own business, we also have to have the same roadmap. We also have to have the same plan. We also have to be able to set goals around that. We also have to have the daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually habits that line up with my goals, that map to my bigger roadmap and my plan to be able to have the success that I'm actually looking for. So if you caught in there, there's actually all the practical and tactical steps that it takes to be able to develop your plan, by the way. So if you need more help on that, let me just kind of recap real quick, and then we'll talk about a resource that I have. It's a free resource that you can download that you can use at any point in your journey to be able to take your next steps. So as women of faith, with this unique perspective and this God-sized idea of a business inside of us based on our specialized knowledge that we have and had it as a lot of success in the corporate space, and then being able to move that over as an entrepreneur, there are steps we have to take, ladies. So step 1 was trusting God's plan and the direction and starting the new business. And I mapped through a bunch of steps. If you missed it, go back and listen to the recording again. Step 2 was identifying and validating that God-sized idea that lines up with my values and my faith. Step 3 was developing a business plan that reflects these faith-based visions and goals, and then going through the process of executing on that business plan, that roadmap. So write it out, talk about it, pray about it. Make sure you're careful and cautious about who you share your dreams with. There's always you got to use some discernment in there and some wisdom. Not everybody's going to be able to embrace and understand and be able to support you and champion you. So 2 things, I have 2 resources for you. Number 1, if you are looking for a community of like-minded women who do these kinds of things, you can find all of us at anitaanello.com. Number 2, if you want a free resource that will help you on this journey, I created a 6-step blueprint, an e-book that I have published this year that gives you the steps to be able to walk through that process, and it's yours for free. You can go ahead and download that at anitaanello.com/free 6-step download. And I'll post a link in the chat as well to be able to make it easier for you just to go ahead and click on it. So be well, ladies, prosper as you go about your day. I'm always praying for you and care about you. I'd love to be able to hear from you. Tell me what's working in your business, what's working in your corporate life as you switch over to be able to launch the business of your dreams. Be able to share that in whatever social media you listen, whatever platform you listen listen to this podcast on, or this message on. And be well, and know that I'm always praying for each and every one of you. Look forward to hearing from you soon.